What do you do to get to a successful closing? It's the Real Estate Show. Welcome to the Real Estate Show. My name is Rick Naples, owner of Zone Realty LLC. You zone your home. And welcome to the Real Estate Show. You found a house, you made your offer was accepted. Now you hope everything comes together so you can close on the property. Now, what does that mean? What is a closing? Well, it basically means everything has come together. You've met all the needs that needed to be met. You've qualified and got all your mortgage paperwork together, and the buyer and the seller have come to terms and agreement to settle on the price. And now you're ready to meet with the attorneys and do the paperwork. The seller is ready to transfer the property over to the buyer. The buyer is ready to accept the keys because they have their monies in place for the purchase. And now everything closes. The buyer can now move into the home and enjoy their home ownership. But how do you get there? What kind of steps do you need to take, or what kind of preparation, or what do you really need to expect to get to the closing? Well, as a buyer, you've gone through all the motions. You've looked for a house, you found the house you wanted to purchase, you've toured it, you've been through it, and you've made your offer. But before you're actually ready to close the deal, there are a couple of things you need to do. One of them is the home inspection. The home inspection is your opportunity to go through the home that you're looking to purchase and make sure that everything works, that everything's there that needs to be there, and that there are no unforeseen problems. The home inspector's been trained with all the codes and the regulations for the particular state that they practice in, and they can spot things that perhaps you might not have seen when you first went through the house. You have to remember, as a buyer, you're out with your realtor and you're going to go look at a home. You may go in that home and be out of it in 15 minutes. That's not really a lot of time to absorb in the whole house and all it has to offer or any of the flaws that it may have. When you're with your home inspector, you're going to spend 2 to 3 hours in that home, going through all of its systems and all of its mechanics, checking out every single little thing there is about the home, and really getting to learn what it is you're buying. Now, one of the other things that everyone seems to forget about is the bank's appraisal. I've always said on the Real Estate Show, there's 3 prices when you're looking to purchase a home. There's the price or the asking that the seller wants for the home. There's the price, of course, that the buyer is going to offer to purchase that home. And then, of course, there's the appraised amount, or what the bank's actually willing to finance on the home. And that's a very important step to get through, because if the house does not appraise for what you're offering, you could have some issues. And I'll address that in the real estate mailbag later on in the show. But what are some of the other things that you need to be aware of? Well, of course, you've prepared in buying a home and putting together all of the funds that you're going to need. Applying for the mortgage, successfully accomplishing getting the mortgage. But there's also some additional dollars that you need to have put aside. Now, I'm not talking about down payment. That's very important, but down payments can vary anywhere from 3% to 20% or more, depending on what your situation is or what kind of mortgage product you're going to be using. What I'm talking about are what the exact closing costs are going to be. What do you need to bring to the table in order for this closing to happen? Well, there are a number of different things, and there are a number of fees that get involved. The law now requires that all those numbers are disclosed to you before you get to the closing, and you have to review those numbers and accept those numbers so that everything is there. There's no surprises when you get to the closing table. Now, when I say no surprises, I don't mean surprises as far as the costs are involved, because as I said, those are disclosed to you. Surprises could happen if by you doing your walkthrough at the last moment, you find that things you negotiated on weren't done, you may have to negotiate at the closing table to get a credit or get some kind of an agreement in order for those things to be solved. And I can tell many, many stories how when I've gotten to a closing table with clients, we'd be sitting there after we did our walkthrough and things were missing or things were changed or things were taken that weren't in the agreement, and we've had to renegotiate a few dollars here or there. And that's where the attorneys come into play. But what I'm talking about mainly here is what to expect when you get to that closing. So let's take a look at this, and then when we come back, I'm going to kind of paint the picture of the closing table and what goes on in that room. The day has come. It's now the day of the official closing of the property that you've gone to purchase. For the seller, it's the day that they're handing over the keys to the new buyer or the person that has purchased the home that they have sold. Everybody arrives or is supposed to go to the attorney's office, and it's usually the buyer's attorney's office of where you're going to meet. Now, today, with all the technology that's available, folks, sometimes closings are done, they call them on-paper closing, and that's where no one really goes to an office. Everything is done through emails and DocuSign and all the different things that are out there, and the only time that the attorney actually sees his client is when he's handing over the keys to the house. But in a traditional closing, the seller and the buyer go to the buyer's attorney's office to finish the paperwork and transfer the ownership from one person to another. Usually what happens is there's a scheduled time for that closing to happen, and the parties will show up. The buyer is usually the first one that goes into the attorney's conference room or the closing room. Now, the reason for that is because the attorney needs to have time to go through the mortgage paperwork. Now, sometimes when you're in the closing room, it will be you, the buyer, your attorney that's representing you. Sometimes the mortgage person who worked on the mortgage paperwork with you will attend the closing, and your buyer's agent will be in the room with you. The attorney will go through the mortgage package page by page. He'll explain the mortgage note and what all those dollars mean. He'll explain all the different aspects of the mortgage, the type of mortgage it is, and there's a series of paperwork that you're going to sign. I always joke around with my buyers and tell them to exercise their writing hand because they're going to sign several dozen times during the course of the closing with all the different forms that they have to sign. Once the buyer is finished with the attorney and they're confident they understand everything that they've gone through and signed everything, then usually the seller and the seller's agent is invited into the closing room or the conference room to come in and sit down and across the table face the buyer so the two of them could talk. This is the opportunity for the seller to convey any additional last-minute information to the buyer. Buyers usually ask at that time questions that you don't think of until you're at your closing. Like, for instance, when does the garbage go out? What day is garbage pickup? What day is recycling pickup? If there's something really specific about the house that can be shared, like the way a key works on a certain door or something in a garage or whatever it might be. The seller may share that information with the buyer at that particular time. It's also the time for the buyer to ask other questions, maybe questions that they hadn't thought of about the house as far as the way certain things function. They have that opportunity because they're with the seller at that moment to ask the questions to the previous owner about those things that they may wish to know about the house that they just purchased. Once everything is signed, once everyone is in agreement, and once the keys have changed over, that's when all the congratulatory handshakes start to happen, and you as a buyer have become the owner of the home, and the seller now has transferred the ownership to you, the buyer. It's a very interesting concept, the closing, because a lot of things can happen that can change the way the closing may happen. And as I said, that can be last-minute negotiations. Now let's step back a little bit and talk about that. Traditionally, when you're buying a house, after you've gone through all the steps and accomplished everything that there is, you're going to do what's called the walkthrough. And I've talked about that on the real estate show before. The walkthrough is your opportunity to go through the home you're purchasing and make sure everything you negotiated on is there. If the house is supposed to include the washer, the dryer, if the house is supposed to include window air conditioning units, if you negotiated on having something fixed, you're checking to make sure those things are done. Because if they're not, you want to make mention to your attorney before you sign any paperwork, so a last-minute negotiation could go on with the seller. You know, life gets in the way, folks, and sometimes you may negotiate something and a seller agrees to do it, but because of availability of certain vendors or tradesmen, maybe something hasn't gotten done by the time the closing's been scheduled. So you might have to renegotiate a little bit on the offering price of the house, or maybe have some kind of credit. But you want to be careful on that, because you want to do that before you get to the closing. Because of the disclosure laws, you need to know what all your closing costs are going to be. And if all of a sudden you're going to be adjusting a lot, say the price of the house or what the offer is going to be, all that paperwork has to be redone to accommodate those new numbers. They do have a little bit of wiggle room in there, so they don't have to redo paperwork, but if you change, for instance, the type of mortgage program that you decided to get, or there's a radical change in the pricing of the house, that's going to change everything, and it just changes the disclosures. And it can actually delay your closing. Let's sit back and take a look at this, and then I'll be back to talk a little bit more about actual closing costs to expect. Welcome back. I'm talking about getting to a successful closing. Now, what are closing costs? We've reviewed those before. Closing costs are a number of different dollars that have to come together that the buyer is going to pay in order for their completed package to be closed, as the word goes. Now, of course, there's a number of different numbers that get involved with it. Obviously, there's going to be your mortgage and what that amount is going to be, and of course, the down payment amount of money that you're putting down on the house. Sometimes you've already put that down payment down. Other times you've put a deposit down and now the balance of that down payment is due at the closing. But there are other costs that are involved. You're going to have certain fees that you're going to have to pay at the closing. Of course, the attorney's fee, the title fee, any copying fees or mail postage fees or whatever that might be involved. And again, when you hire an attorney for a closing, you want to make sure that you've asked them questions on what to expect, on what those costs are going to be. The seller's side of the closing, they're going to see what the real estate commissions are that they're paying out, any adjustments to taxes. If the house, for instance, is oil heat, there's going to be an adjustment for the oil that's in the tank. And that's kind of an interesting thing, and I'm going to say this to the buyers. You know, when you have oil heat in a house, you have oil in a tank in the basement. Before the closing, they take a measurement of what that oil is going to be. And you're buying that oil in the tank along with the house. So you're going to see in your closing amount of dollars that are due to purchase that oil. Unless the seller has agreed to just transfer what's in the oil, what's in the tank to you at no charge, you usually end up purchasing that oil. So there's a dollar amount that might be unexpected, but will be disclosed to you before you get to your closing, and you need to be aware of. A couple of other things that you have to be aware of at the closing as far as fees are concerned are fees for private mortgage insurance. That's the insurance policy that you have to take out if you put less than 20% down in your mortgage. It insures the bank for any deficits or any problems there might be as far as the mortgage is concerned, because they're taking a higher risk by loaning you more than opposed to, say, a conventional loan with 20% down. But again, all of these dollars are going to be disclosed to you when you get to the closing table, and it will be a review because before you get to the closing table, you do get a statement that itemizes out all the different costs and tells you exactly what you need to be prepared for when you come to the closing. How much is that total going to be? What can it be? What if you have a specific loan where you're paying down the interest rate by paying points on the mortgage? How much money do I need to bring to my closing? It's a great question, and I'll talk about that right after this. So what do you bring to the closing? How much money do you need to bring? Well, there's a couple of things you have to do in preparing for that closing that you're going to prepay, and you need to bring receipts to your attorney to show that you've prepaid for that. One of those things is your home insurance policy. It's required that you secure a homeowner's insurance policy on the home before you can close, and you have to pay the full year's premium on that insurance policy. That's so there's a whole year worth of coverage before the next premium is due. So if you're going to escrow the amount of your home insurance in your mortgage payment, that's fine, but you have to build that up over a year. So you're going to be required to shop around, find your homeowner's insurance company, purchase the homeowner's policy, pay for 1 year, a full premium for 1 year, and make sure that your attorney has the receipt and the evidence that that's done. Closing costs, as far as attorney's fees are concerned, appraisal fees from the bank, mortgage application fees, real estate commissions, title fees, copy fees, all those types of things, all those totals. We used to use a guideline. We'd say whatever you're purchasing the house for, your closing costs can be anywhere from 3% to upwards of 6%, depending on whether there's points or not, of what the selling price of the home is concerned. So I always say to people, when you're looking to purchase a home, look at what the price range of that house is and what you're looking to make an offer, and then add on to that what you're going to need for a down payment and another 3 to 6% to cover your closing costs, unless you're getting a mortgage program which has allowed you to finance the closing costs within the deal. Now, there is another thing that is done that is part of your negotiation. You can ask the seller to pick up all your closing costs. So there's something that you need to talk to your realtor about when you're making the offer, because sometimes the seller, if they're getting close to what their asking price is concerned, they may accept the offer and agree to cover all the closing costs for you once you get to the closing table. Not necessarily the homeowner's insurance policy, though. That's something that you got to secure on your own. This is the portion of the real estate show I call the real estate mailbag. It allows me to answer questions that are sent to the real estate show. It also gives me the time to make some commentary. And I had mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about appraisals. Question that I'm asked all the time is, what happens, Rick, if I go to purchase a house, the bank does the appraisal, and the appraisal doesn't come in at what I'm offering? What do I do then? Well, there's three things that can happen. When a house appraises short, it doesn't appraise for what you're offering on the home, you can do, as I said, one of three things. The first thing is you can just basically pull out of the deal. You're not able to obtain the mortgage because the house didn't appraise. That is a verifiable and justifiable reason to just pull out of the deal. A lot of people don't, though. They want to make it work. They want to purchase this house. So the second thing that you can possibly do is renegotiate with the seller. Hey, you asked this, I offered that, and you accepted my offer, but now the bank is saying they'll only finance this. I need you to come down a little bit to meet the appraised amount so I can secure the mortgage and we can close on the property. That's sometimes a tough negotiation because you may have a seller that doesn't believe that appraisal and may want to do an appraisal on their own, thus delaying the closing. The third option is to just pay out of pocket the difference. If it's close, say it's only off by $500 or $1,000 or a small amount, you may want to just pay that out of pocket directly to the seller to make the numbers match so that you can, again, get the financing that you need to close on the house. But again, it's one of the more important points where a whole deal can fall apart, and that's the appraisal. Of course, if the house appraises higher, well, then the buyer is very happy. My name is Rick Naples. This has been The Real Estate Show. I thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.